the live stream.
Campbell, are you going to post the link onto Facebook?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I'll share it on there and on Twitter.
Sweet, thank you.
So Campbell, are you going to hang there until we've finished the public part of the meeting and then disconnect the video streaming?
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, you are now live, everyone.
Thank you very much. Go over to you, Penny.
Good morning, councillors, staff, and of course our social media people, hopefully, that are on board for our planning and strategy committee meeting this morning, the last day of the month, 30th of April. Like to welcome everybody and start the meeting. We are running a little bit late, 10:05. And firstly, have we got any apologies?
No, there's no apologies received. So I note that Valerie Miller, Councillor Miller, is not here, but she's not a formal apology at this stage. So we'll just note that in the minutes.
Okay, she might be just running a little bit late.
Yeah.
Do we have any declarations of conflict of interest?
No.
No.
Just a point of note that I was a hearing commissioner on one of the hearings that we're about to discuss. I don't think it's a conflict. We've been through this before, but just wanted to raise that.
Okay. All right. Okay. I'm also keeping an eye on my little chat box in case anyone types in. Right. Public forum. No resolutions required, I think.
No, so we
don't have any matters lying on the table, do we, Stacey?
No, there's no matters lying on the table. And just to note for the public forum, there were no comments sent through to governance, so there's none to be read. Okay.
So would someone be kind enough to have a confirmation of the agenda? Are we happy there?
Yes, happy.
Happy to second.
Thank you very much. Now we've got some minutes to confirm.
Sorry, Penny.
So we've got the 19th of March to begin with, Stacey.
Penny, sorry, just to quickly backtrack, just for my sake, when you're getting someone to move and second, if you could just confirm which councillor has moved and seconded, because I need to just hear a name just to note, because it's a bit hard to gauge just from someone's voice at the moment, just on the platform that we're using.
Okay, all right. So was I correct in believing Callum moved and John seconded?
Other way around, Penny. John moved, Callum seconded.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm now moving on to the confirmation of the minutes for the 19th of March, our last meeting. Can I have someone confirm, or are there any questions?
Happy to confirm, Penny.
Thank you. So John has confirmed, and I need a seconder.
I'll jump in there again.
Thanks, Callum. Yeah, it's just, yeah, my Zoom chat is right in the middle of my screen, so it makes it a bit hard to see if anyone puts a hand up. Okay, thank you. So did we get that, Stacey? John and Callum, thank you. So then we need to move on to the second set of minutes of the public. So now we're actually into the business now, the proposed district plan, chapter 11 and chapter 27. And I believe Ian has a presentation to put to us. Do I have Ian?
Can't hear Ian at all.
You're on mute.
Ah, yes, I can see you, Ian. We need mute off, please.
Ian, you're on mute still.
Ian.
No, it's still on mute. Yeah.
Yep, there we go, Ian, thank you.
Oh, I still can't hear him.
Still
Can you
can't
hear
hear
us?
you, Ian.
Ian,
There might be a problem with your headset.
can't hear you.
Okay,
There we go.
Oh, fabulous.
Yep.
It's better.
can people hear me? Apologies for that. Yes, I don't have a presentation for this item, but if people have the agenda item in front of them, myself and Craig Barr will be taking you through this item. Initially, I would just want to clarify an error in, correct an error in the report. There's an incomplete sentence in paragraph 11 of the agenda report, where it reads, the only outstanding appeals to Chapter 11 large lot residential relate to the visitor accommodation short-term letting provisions introduced in stage 2. And there's an incomplete sentence that follows that should read, and I have emailed the Stacey the text, so I'll just read that out. The subdivision chapter has consent orders sitting with the Environment Court containing agreed proposals to resolve all the appeals to council's decisions on this chapter in stage 1. However, the appeals to council's decisions on chapter 27, which is the subdivision chapter, in stage 2, that relate to the Wakatipu Basin remain unresolved at this time. So, yeah, that's the amendment to it. First of all, I just wanted to sort of introduce this item just to explain what we're doing in the policy team. While we're in lockdown, we are able to work from home, but we are not, because of the level 4 restrictions, we're not in a position where we can sort of consult with the community. We can't do site visits. We can't, it's not really fair to sort of engage with stakeholders and interested parties about some of the kind of challenging plan changes that Queenstown Lakes District are known for introducing. So at this time, we've taken upon ourselves to do a number of sort of what I'm calling pastoral care plan changes to the plan, where we're, if you like, sort of catching up on a number of plan changes that we would have liked to be able to introduce, but we've been dealing with a lot of appeals and our major sort of stage plan review with the hearings program and evidence exchange and all that. So we've got a number of plan changes that we're working on, and this is just the first one out of the blocks. They're not kind of earth-shattering sort of plan changes, but they are going to hopefully sort of improve the plan for a lot of users and just address some areas that are annoying and can be quite sort of problematic for plan users. We're also looking at several changes which, although they're sort of small in scope, addressing areas where the ODP has become a bit outdated. So what we'd like to be able to do is to bring those to Planning and Strategy Committee in the context where councillors are not going to be asked to actually make a decision about notifying these provisions at this time. What we're wanting to do is to introduce the provisions to yourselves and hopefully seek sort of general agreement that these proposals are there or thereabouts, and then we can continue to work on them, do whatever we need to do in terms of pre-notification activities with consulting iwi and ORC and neighbouring authorities and things like that. And then we can bring the provisions to council at a future date for a decision on notification. The same sort of things apply where if there are efficiencies where we can notify a whole sort of bunch of stuff together, then we'll put them to council together. But if it is more efficient to just put them out as discrete plan changes that don't affect many people, and we can limit the sort of notification work that we do around it, then we'll sort of do them one by one. But yeah, this item today is the first of these pastoral care plan changes, as I'm calling them. I appreciate that it's a fairly sort of technical plan change somewhat, and it's not sort of super easy to get your head around the rules and the purpose of what we're doing. So what I was going to do is ask Craig Bard, our principal policy planner, resource management, to give a really brief introduction for why we're doing this and how it's meant to work, if that's okay.
Thanks, Ian.
Hi, Craig speaking, for those of you who can't see me. So this the rationale for this plan change in a nutshell is to better facilitate subdivision in the large lot residential zone that we consider is anticipated to occur in any case. The land that it affects primarily relates to Wanaka, and it's land that was zoned rural residential under the operative district plan. So the majority, by far the majority of land has already been subdivided to a size of 4,000 metres squared, and has in many cases has a house established on it. And for the most part, those houses are less than 10 years old, so the housing stock's quite new as well. So it's probably something to bear in mind when you're thinking about infill and the likelihood of houses being demolished or removed to make way for new subdivision. So when we notified the proposed district plan in 2015, the minimum allotment size in this area was 4,000 metres squared, which effectively rolled over or sort of retained the minimum allotment size for those sites as was in the previous rural residential zone. Through submissions, the hearings panel supported the ability for infill and to create sites, or to expect a density of one site, one residential unit every 2,000 metres squared. Since that time, there's been quite a lot of subdivision in that zone, and there's been some practical issues with people wanting to undertake subdivision to be able to achieve the 2,000 metres squared. And the main reason for that is because these aren't what we call greenfield sites, where it might be 2 or 3 hectares and you could imagine there'd be sort of 5 or 10 houses built or sections developed. You've got individual 4,000 square metre properties with, generally speaking, a house located somewhere towards the middle of the site. And the configuration of the subdivisions that these were created by have resulted in sort of traditional rectangular shaped sections, which are probably done for efficiency so that you have a relatively narrow part of your property frontage along the road, and then it's more deeper along the back. So what that means is that when people do infill, is that it's harder to cut the site in half and have an equal road frontage. They need to create an access leg down the back of the property, so you get a front lot, rear lot configuration. And what that means is that there's land that's lost in terms of the net area calculation. You can't include land that's used for an access leg or shared land for a right of way. So you're looking at in the order of sort of somewhere between 30 to 40 metres by 4 metres wide that's lost. So what's happening in practice is that people who are wanting to do subdivision are struggling to meet the 2,000 metres squared net area. And so the feedback we've had and the experiences that we've had as a council is that there's been quite a few applications have been notified, and perhaps if you stand back and look at the intent of the zone, the message that we consider came through in the hearings panel's report to allow infill to create across the zone one house every 2,000 metres squared, and then you take into account that the majority of sites are 4,000 metres squared. We think that what would be better achieved is if the rules amended to take into account land that's lost as part of the subdivision, which is why we're proposing a smaller net area of 1,500 metres squared. So that's essentially that. So across this, so the intent of this change is to better achieve the intent of the zone or the policies for the zone. It's not necessarily to change the environmental outcome that's anticipated or that was sort of set down through the decisions on submissions for that zone. So hopefully that helps sort of canvas why we're looking at changing this.
Thanks, Craig. Ian, I think you're talking to us, but we can't hear.
Yeah. Sorry, I've done it again. Yeah, if councillors had an opportunity to have a look at the Section 32 report, I know Section 32 reports are painful to read, but down the back of the report is a bunch of maps which show a whole bunch of sites, particularly in Wanaka, that are around the 4,000 metre squared mark. And that's why in this particular zone, there's a situation where the rules are not going to achieve what's stated in the purpose of the zone, which is that the zone generally provides for a density of 1 residence every 2,000 metres squared. Because as Craig's pointed out, when you when you factor in a driveway and that sort of thing, it's not going to it's going to be non-complying, and we really ideally would like to avoid a situation where our consents team are approving a whole lot of non-complying activities. We want the integrity of the district plan to be upheld, and that's part of people sort of having faith in the integrity of the consent authority, is that they're generally applying the plan, taking into account, you know, individual circumstances, which might mean the rules don't always get an exact translation into what happens. But yeah, this is slightly different to other zones where you really those rules are really important to achieve the intended outcome, because there's just so many sites that are around that 4,000 square metre mark.
Thanks, Ian. Okay, are we ready for question time? Do I have anyone? I'm opening up to the floor.
Quentin.
Okay,
Yeah, thank you.
Quentin.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I do have a few questions, and I have taken the liberty of sending them through to Ian and Tony, and I'll try not to, I'm conscious of not taking a lot of time, but also maybe we'll just use them as a bit of guidance to having a discussion around this. Now, firstly, you know, lot sizes and leg ends and things like that aren't unique to the rural residential or large lot residential zone, and certainly, you know, as far as I can, well, my experience tells me that these situations are quite common within the low density suburban residential zone, what was the old low density residential zone, which equally we've changed from a 700 square metre minimum allotment size down to 450. I think that's correct. Is that right, Ian? And
Yes.
You know, that if we're to look at the history of that, is that under the previous rules, if you had 900 square metres, you could build 2 houses and subdivide. So there was a whole lot of subdivision that was done specifically to avoid that occurring. So there were 880 square metres, 870 square metres sections in order to avoid the risk, I suppose, or the opportunity for further subdivision. Now, many of those sites will be the same, is that they'll be just under the amount of land available to someone to do a subdivision under the new rules, and I don't understand how that's any different. We use net area calculations across all the zones as the determining of minimum allotment size calculations. I just wonder why you think this is different to, firstly, why this is different to other zones and why we're abandoning a net area calculation.
I can help with that. The answers to that. I don't think comparing it to the low density residential zone is the best comparator. I do acknowledge that there is infill contemplated in the low density zone, but I don't think we should focus on the operative district plan that had minimum lot sizes of 700, 600 or 900 in various areas, but you could build to 450 square metres. That was a bit of a nonsense, and we've removed that. Or the proposed district plans removed that. I think what's important here is, which might sort of illustrate how it has happened in the low density zone, is that in this operative district plan subdivision chapter and proposed, if you have 2 dwellings established, the minimum lot size rule doesn't apply. So that's probably why this has never come up. Well, that's why this has never come up in the low density zone. In the low density zone also.
But understand that the comparison was to demonstrate that, well, in part to demonstrate that, that there was a density provision separate to the minimum allotment size thing in the low density. And as you said, you removed that and went to a definitive minimum allotment size requirement.
Yeah.
Now, in this case, you're arguing the opposite way around, is that you're saying that, well, the minimum allotment size doesn't matter, we're interested about density. So I'm just confused by that.
Well, it's density in the context of what's sought to be achieved across the zone, which is one house every 2,000 square metres. And the subdivision rules require 2,000 square metres net area, which goes back to what I've already explained. Just as an example there, the low density residential zone has an infill rule, and it allows for development through a resource consent, so the council can control access and design and ensure there's manoeuvring on site and those sorts of things. But it allows for infill development where the proposed lots would be between 450 metres squared and 300 metres squared. So that acknowledges that you would end up with that constraint with not being able to achieve that.
But
it also comes back.
That acknowledges that a separate assessment of the suitability of the access and stuff can be made in that case.
Yeah, that's right. Once you get sites that get sort of below sort of 400 metres squared, or I think it's important I think the rationale there is from a functionality and design perspective that you can be confident that you get developments that would work. But with the large lot residential zone, because we're the proposed change is looking for a minimum net area of 1,500 metres squared, providing that you still achieve 2,000 metres squared overall, it shouldn't be difficult to be able to design and locate a house that would still achieve reasonable levels of amenity, because there's a lot more room on the site. Even under that low density residential, sort of the operative configuration where you had this 900 or 700 subdivision with developing at 450, those sites would have still been subdivided from a greenfield parcel of land. They still would have been subdivided from a greenfield parcel of land, but in this case it's completely different, because these houses, these sites in the large lot residential A zone in Wanaka were created from were subdivided down to 4,000 square metres or just over, and they probably have a house on them, so it makes it difficult to achieve that net area of 2,000 metres squared. And the feedback we're getting is that applications are being notified. That imposes a substantial transaction cost on the applicant, when it seems to us that the intent of the zone's being achieved.
Okay, so I'll just continue on with a few things. So on your table on page 46, you've done a sample lots of 20 examples there. Now I've gone through them each in turn, and you've obviously done an assessment under the rules, under the proposed rules versus the existing ones. I make it that only 2 of those out of 20 are actually impacted by this net area problem. Most of them are impacted by the fact that they're either already less than 4,000 or they're the building's been built in the wrong place. So can you just clarify? You've used the statement that this applies to a majority of cases, but in the reality is that your evidence only says it impacts 2 out of 20.
Where's that? I'm just looking for the. Yeah. Sorry to dive into the detail. I'm just sort of struggling to see where you say that. I'm looking at the table now.
Well, I've been through, so I've read the comments and your.
It's just a sample. Yeah, I mean, this is just a sample. I mean, we identified that there's around 500 sites that are actually over 4,000 square meters in the zone overall. So there is a lot of potential for this rule. Obviously, a lot of those sites would be able to subdivide under the existing rule, and it's mainly those ones that are around the 4,000 square metre mark. This was just a sample, and yeah, there's only a few examples here, but there's I mean, we've already had 24 non-complying subdivisions that are non-complying because of this rule that have been granted. So that this is an issue within Wanaka for the public out there and for the consents team.
Okay. So I've and this is in terms of the outcomes of those non-complying consents. And I saw this one for sale on a real estate website, and unfortunately I don't have the actual plan, so I've drawn my own version of it. And you can see that that was a site, and it was near Albert Town in Wanaka. The house is in the middle of the site. There was landscaping, which is a dot around the site. And this was the subdivision that resulted from a non-complying activity, which, you know, the dashed area is the bit that was subdivided off. Now, I would suggest that that's a pretty poor subdivision design outcome from the application of these rules, and that's primarily what I'm concerned about here. I'm not concerned about, you know, I accept that the commissioners have made a determination that infill is appropriate. What I'm asking ultimately, and you know, this to get to the nut of the problem, is what are we doing to encourage good subdivision design outcomes? And you know, that is the fundamental challenge in this environment, is how do we infill large lot residential going down to a density of 2,000 square metres and resulting good subdivision outcomes. And I want to just refer you to the policies that you've highlighted in your assessment, because I think this comes to the crux of it, and I'll sort of go through them. Urban growth is managed in a strategic and integrated manner. How do we make this integrated? That promote compact, well-designed, integrated urban form, build on historic settlement patterns, require allotments that are suitably sized and shaped, and I go back to this, and are able to be serviced and developed for the anticipated land use. Discourage non-compliance, and this is really interesting one. Discourage non-compliance with minimum allotment sizes. However, where minimum allotment sizes are not achieved in urban areas, consideration will be given to whether any adverse effects are mitigated or compensated by desirable urban design outcomes, greater efficiency of land use, and or affordable housing. I think affordable housing is a bit irrelevant in large lot residential. Potential for small scale and infill subdivision in urban areas that recognises and provided for while acknowledging their design limitations.
Okay,
there are limitations.
I'll just cut in there, Quentin.
Yeah.
So what are you reading from in quite detail?
So I'm reading the policy table under page 25 of the section 32 report. So they're different policies.
What page is that in?
25. So there's a range of, some of them are strategic, chapter 3 objectives, some of them are chapter 27 policies and objectives.
So just to be clear, are these existing objectives and policies within the district plan?
Yes.
Right. So the point, so I've just got across the point of raising these, I'm just trying to get to the point of what is it that you're asking for now?
Yeah. So the point of raising these is this is what we have to measure the proposed changes to provision against. We need to measure that whether the proposed changes achieves these objectives and policies, and that's why I'm referring to them. That's a specific part of what will be asked of the staff and whoever hears the commissioners that hear this. So you know, it goes on, and I won't read all of that except small scale subdivision in urban areas and infill subdivision where subdivision involves established builds might be limited because of opportunities to give effect to the above, which relates to good subdivision design, ensure lots are shaped and sized to allow, you know, good on-site amenity and privacy, avoid the creation of multiple rear lots except where avoidance is not practical. So, you know, it's actually discouraging rear lots. That's a policy in the subdivision section, is that, and if I may, and I'll just use this as a bit of a, and I'll try to finish up on this because I'm aware that, you know, I don't want to dominate this. I'll share you one picture. I just want to, one other factor is that if we have a net area of 1,500 square meters on any rural residential section, that section is limited to 225 square meters of site coverage, because 15% of 1,500 square meters is 225 square meters. Now, by any measure, that is a significantly restricted building footprint on a large rural residential section. Most rural residential houses would be 250 square meters plus a 60 square meter garage. And if I may, I'll just do a quick screen share to demonstrate.
Yeah. Oh dear, no.
Does that come up for people?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I did a quick sketch over this part of the, and this is at Hawea, and I've zoomed in to make it clearer there. And this is the subdivision. I'm sorry, it's just shifted a bit. This is
when
the
you zoom in,
outcome.
when you Quentin, when you zoom in, it alters the picture, so the roads that you've drawn on it don't apply. So it's probably better if you zoom out. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Unfortunately, it's removed my sketches, but the point being is that the subdivision layout that results, that Lycan Lane, which is here, Sam John Place, which is here, this site here is a 4-acre site. This site here is a 1-acre site. The subdivision of those literally branch out like a bunch of trees, branches on a tree. They don't result in good subdivision design, and we're doing nothing to promote good subdivision design through the amendment to these rules. Now, I do have, I think we need to, as I said, I don't want to go to try and redesign the rules on the fly, but I do think we need to go back and take a more holistic view to how we're going to promote good quality infill. And this is the crux of how are we going to do this in a way that's going to result in good design outcomes for the things. Now, I think that removing or changing the net area calculation is only going to shift the problem slightly to a different thing. It doesn't cut to the core of the problem. It doesn't deal to the cause of the problem. And I think there's also a significant issue in that we have defined in the definitions in the district plan, we have defined what net area, what site area is, and it refers, you know, it is net area. We haven't defined what gross area is, and we haven't defined what total area is. So I think it creates some significant problems for you in administering the plan.
So
I'll leave it at that. But
well, do you want us to answer that, or do you want to just leave it there, Quentin?
Well, sorry, you're welcome to address that. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, welcome to respond to that. Sorry. Yeah.
Thanks. They're all important concepts. I think just going back to your first question around the 225 meters squared, it's an interesting one. And this applies to, as a sort of broad answer to everything you've asked, is that the purpose of this variation is to facilitate more efficient transaction costs while still achieving what we think is the intent of the zone and the policies. It's not a first principles variation. We could, it's interesting that you've raised the 225 meters squared. It is quite a limitation because under the 4,000 meters squared, the same coverage you'd get 6 600 square meters of building. There's an argument that could go both. There's sort of three things that I can probably advise the committee on for this. It's that by retaining the coverage relative to the net area means that, yes, the houses would be constrained. There's not going to be small houses by any means. That would still help achieve a high level of amenity because you're going to have more room for landscape planting. The other issue there is that we're trying to deal with the problem that's resulted in what is a frustrated resource consent process and transaction for people wanting to undertake subdivision in the resource consent team. And the third issue is, yes, we are conscious of this, and we could modify it, but we don't want to start modifying too much and go back to first principles. You know, we're looking at a change that better facilitates an outcome that's anticipated. We're not looking at, well, if you notify something and needs to go through the first schedule process, people can make submissions. There could be a hearing, there could be an appeal. That would take about 2 years. If people generally agree with what the council's trying to do here, it could be operative or treated as operative within 3 or 4 months. Maybe that's wishful thinking. So, but that is something we'll look at. We could look at increasing that.
Appeals and submissions, though, wouldn't it? So that
only if people oppose it. Only if people oppose it.
Only if people make submissions as a subject, you mean?
And they wish to be heard at a hearing and their submissions in opposition, and then they get appealed. I mean, the large lot residential zone has been treated as operative since the appeal period finished in June 2018, which is why it's being administered, which is why we're sort of looking at sort of making tweaks to make it better. So, and just going back to your sorry.
Doesn't this bring into scope any of, like, if you're changing a lot size, then you will likely receive submissions to people wanting to reduce it to 800 square meters or
no, that'd be out of
1,000
scope.
square meters.
No, hopefully not. Hopefully we've framed the section 32 and we'd frame the public notice in such a way that it's to deal with the issue that the council's put forward. It's not like the sort of first principles submissions you can get when you notify a new zone as part of a plan review, where people can ask for an alternative zone or ask for alternative lot sizes. That's why we've purposely kept this quite constrained. And so just going on the other sort of comments and questions you made there, those subdivision policies that we've identified that sort of say discourage creating rear lots. That policy is in the context of greenfield development, where you're trying to discourage a whole lot of rear lots or a whole lot of access lanes, and you're trying to encourage sort of good greenfield subdivision that has good accessibility and connections. And I think the policy acknowledges that there would be constraints for infill. And the example you gave in Howie is
and limitations, I think, as well, as it says that basically it implies that not all sites are suitable for infill. But look, we're going down a rabbit hole here. But I think, you know, as I said, that I totally understand the background for this, and I understand the challenges. And look, we do need to find a better way to deal with these sites in order to
comes back to the
cost effective.
I think it comes back to important.
But I think, you know, if we're to deal with it as what are the consequential changes of this, and what do we need to address? And clearly there's more to it than just tweaking the lot size, is what I'm saying. Is we need to understand a way to get better outcomes, and we need to understand a way to adjust the provisions, including the site coverage provisions and other things that are consequentially affected by this.
Perhaps, but what I think is important, and that I probably couch to the other members of the committee too, is that I think you're going too far, and I don't agree with you. The example you gave in Hawea was a reason why during the stage 1 Upper Clutha hearing for rezonings, the council's reporting officer didn't support rezoning that land to a more intensive, because it was notified as rural residential, and it was the decisions on submissions made at 2,000 meters squared, and that was one of the reasons. And the hearings panel said, nope, we think it's fine. It'll provide infill opportunities. It will provide socioeconomic benefits for those landowners. The die's already been cast around the fact that there's 30 or 20 different lot owners in there with varying, different sections, shapes and sizes. Infill development and the potential sort of modest outcomes you're going to get from access legs and driveways and the scenario that you gave us is a practical reality, and we need to deal with that. I don't think we can go back to first principles now and somehow come up with some design initiative that's going to make that problem go away. And the example you gave where you've identified a site that's being marketed with had an infill development on it, I mean, that was I take your point. I mean, if that was a non-complying activity and that's the outcome, and you don't think that's an appropriate outcome, that's perhaps something to take up with the consents team, because it was a non-complying activity. So it's going to be hard to get that. But I think the die's been cast in places like, Sam John Place and those sort of the large lot residential A zone in Hawea.
Thanks, Craig. I really think, Councillor Smith, to be fair, I need to open this up to the floor to give other councillors
Yeah, agree.
Question, please.
Yep, agree.
So have we got comments from other councillors, please?
I have a question regarding the other part of it, which is around the colour, change to the colour. If the colour rules apply to the 4,000 square metre lot, why would the subdivided lot not have the same colour rules? Aren't you just...
They would, yeah. The distinction there is that that's in the large lot residential B zone, which is only the land on the flanks of Mount Iron at the back of Wanaka. So so that area has been retained at 4,000 metres squared. And if somebody did a subdivision in that part, they would need to achieve 4,000 metres squared as well. What happened was that when the plan was notified, it had it had colour controls in the area for Mount Iron, and it also had colour controls in the area that is now the large lot A zone. The colour controls were less onerous, but because it was on the edge of the urban environment and they were, well, a lot of them were, and they're the anticipated relatively big houses, and the existing regime had that control because it was rural residential, even though it was pretty much in the middle of urban Wanaka. It was more about maintaining the amenity and expectations for that zone. The hearings panel decided that the large lot A zone, when they created it, didn't need to have any colour controls at all, but they didn't amend, or perhaps it was an oversight, that the policy wasn't amended. And the way the policy reads at the moment is that the colour controls apply to the large lot A zone as well as large lot B, but there's no rules that require a certain colour in large lot A. So that's why there's this sort of tweak to the policy. So yeah, short answer is if you did a subdivision in the large lot B, yes, you'd be subject to those rules too. But there's not a lot of capacity in the large lot B zone for subdivision. The majority of sites are developed to 4,000 metres squared.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Callum or Neve? Thanks, Neve.
Okay, I'll go for it then. Thank you. First, I just want to acknowledge what Ian said right at the start of this conversation, which was that this is a discussion, this is a proposal that is being brought to us to decide on a clearer route before coming to a council meeting for agreement, which I think is really quite important. I personally feel, and Ian also mentioned that this was quite a complex and technical point, and it's taken me some time to formulate my questions. I still don't feel like I have enough information to be able to say this is a terrific idea. And I'm not sure that this is the right forum to ask those questions, but just a couple of observations. These 4,000 square metre sections, and I appreciate that, you know, maybe when they were purchased, they're there was an intent, or at least an understanding, that at some point in the future they could be subdivided down into 2,000 square meters each. And Craig mentioned that many of the houses that have been established are less than 10 years old, and in many cases have been big properties established right in the center of the property, which, you know, that would tend to imply that there is no opportunity for sensible development of a further section, is one comment. Another comment is that, you know, I appreciate we want to move towards a holistic solution, whereby the resource consent applications that are permitted with non-compliant status should be the exception rather than the norm. But just looking at the table with some examples of lots and the, you know, the current ODP and this proposed change, there were 4 instances where the existing property would seem to suggest that any which way you slice and dice it, that subdividing would be trying to shoehorn a property in behind the property, the existing property. Another comment is that Craig mentioned that in many cases these long sections and the ability to subdivide and use land at the back would require an easement which cuts into the 2,000 square meters, but mentioned a drive size of 30 to 40 meters by 4 meters, which comes out as 160 square meters. Personally, I would be a lot more comfortable with a minimum net lot size of 1,800 square meters rather than 1,500. You know, ultimately, at the end of the day, we need to find a solution, and maybe this is the solution. Like I say, I just don't know, but we need to find a solution that is holistic and allows for responsible, sensible urban development that actually works. So those are my comments.
Thanks, Councillor Shaw. I'm anticipating that Callum might wish to have a say. Thanks, Callum.
You anticipate well, Councillor Clark. Thank you very much. I just wanting, and I have got some sympathy. I was a hearing commissioner on this, and the LLRs are a peculiar Upper Clutha quirk that do my head in every time. I've got some sympathy for Quentin's points, but at this point, this is going to, we're being asked to note and move on, and this will be going to out to the general populace. If we actually end up tweaking lot sizes, you end up going in trying to amend this on the fly. So that's possibly not the best outcome we want. Can I ask a question? The process, what is the process moving forward for this? Will this end up being heard by commissioners?
It depends. The next thing to do is to consult with local practitioners and landowners who we know are interested, because of the restrictions at the moment. That makes it a bit tough, but it's not hard to email people. It would, and in time, it will go back to council for to request endorsement for notification as a variation. There would probably be a 20 working day submission period, and if people make submissions and wish to be heard, then there would be a hearing and it would go before commissioners, just like the usual process. Yeah.
So there we go. So in terms of the process moving forward, the process will possibly modify what we've got in front of us. That would, if you look at also the LLRs in general, which is again Warnock, Upper Clutha, they were the borderline of what was the urban area, and they're now slap bang in the middle of the urban area. So their whole process has changed, so that the infill, which I think we all agree in principle is a good idea, is going to occur. So however that ends up is sort of however that ends up there. And it's an unfortunate thing, like as Craig says, the die has been cast. So you end up with the likes of the Hawea scenario. And those two roads that Quentin pointed out, I think during the hearing, what happened was that the subdivider, who shall remain nameless, at his cost could have sealed them off, joined them up, but would have had to have sealed it. And that cost wasn't prepared to be bared. So he did two cul-de-sacs, which I'm sure Tony Avery would love, because I know he's a big fan of cul-de-sacs as a urban design principle. Third and supplementary question, and just to confirm, we are in public excluded. Stacey, yes?
No.
No, we're in public.
No, this is public.
I was just wondering if, well, okay, I'll throw it out there anyway. I was just wondering if that was a chamber pot on the shelf to Craig's left, and has he got resource consent for that?
It's for use in emergencies.
Right,
I think we need to try and move on here, please, ladies and gentlemen.
Move on. Happy to move. Happy to move.
So you want to move. Has anyone else got anything to say? Val?
You're on mute, Val.
Val, we can't hear you.
Still on mute.
Unmute. Done. Sorry, I was late to this meeting. I had a mishap in my timetabling, and I am not well read on this subject, shall we say. So I haven't got a comment, but I am listening with interest to everybody else's.
Thanks, Val.
Just to clarify where I'm at, I think we need to go back and do some more work on this. As I said, I'm not opposed to, in principle, the idea of infill. I just think we need to be much more smart about how we provide for it, and I don't think this actually solves any problems.
All right, so Councillor Smith, are you trying to move a new motion on this, or are we trying to move forward? I guess
well,
to make some decisions.
I'm conscious that Callum's already moved to accept the recommendation. If there's opportunity, I'll happily move to an alternate motion, but obviously his is on the table at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
I've
lost you for the moment, Callum.
Madam Chair, we haven't had an opportunity to go through all of Councillor Smith's questions that he put to us yesterday. So officers are happy to respond to each of those specific questions if that will assist. There is an opportunity to continue to work on these provisions, and yeah, we can certainly respond to all those questions if that helps.
Okay, thank you.
Well, are you suggesting, I mean, I'm just wondering whether there is an opportunity to continue this dialogue somehow at a workshop or through another forum, and I accept that I don't expect all those questions to be answered today, and I don't think it's but I understand that it's from perceived as reasonably academic or procedural, but it does have consequences, and it does something we should be cognizant of. So,
Madam Chair, if I may, that the recommendation in point 2 does say agree in principle subject to further work that the matters in attachment A and attachment B are suitable for recommending to council. I think potentially that might actually give us the opportunity, and I'd happily pass that over to Ian to see if that is the case.
I can take a specific direction if councillors want to workshop items like this before an item like this comes to Planning and Strategy Committee, then we can arrange those workshops. Obviously, workshops on technical planning detailed changes may not be every councillor's cup of tea, but we can arrange workshops of that nature if that's desirable for the committee.
Thanks, Ian. Yes, Tony, you would like to.
I think just to make progress, though, we do need a decision based on the recommendations before you. My concern, I think, recommendation 2, though, picking up on the points, is around the proposal in front of us to modify the current provisions, not to review all of the provisions relating to this particular zone, which is what Councillor Smith is effectively asking for, as I understand it. So we do need to make some progress. The reasoning for this proposed change has been explained. It's an administrative efficiency reasons for all the things. We can come back and talk about those aspects, and I think that's still under the scope of recommendation 2. The broader questions, though, would actually take a lot more work than what's recommended in terms of this report itself. So we either, Madam Chair, my suggestion, you either need to put the motion and see whether it passes or not, or if Councillor Smith has an alternative, then we can sort of consider that. But I emphasise that if we start to tweak elements of the proposal in terms of the wording, then I think the best thing would be to not pass a resolution, because tweaking words in this sort of forum is inherently dangerous in terms of the unintended consequences of some of those tweaks and changes. It would be better to take it and have a more considered approach around that.
Okay, well, we do actually have a seconder, Tony, from John, but I see Quinton has his hand up.
I was just going to reinforce that I'm conscious there is a motion on the ground that does have a second, so clearly we need to address that first. If I was given the opportunity, I would put a different motion, which would be something like that: reject the proposal and instruct the officers to come back with a more comprehensive approach to managing this issue, something in that order.
Okay, well, I guess we're opening to the floor. I need a little bit of help here, Stacey, maybe, to just check that if we have Callum putting the motion and John seconding, I need to ascertain a vote from everyone else. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I believe that because we've got a mover and a seconder for this motion, we need to take a vote on that. And if it falls through, then Quentin would have a chance to offer an alternate motion.
So can I just one bit of a note on terms of what Councillor Smith has suggested, just to note that a more comprehensive review of the provisions would take some time to get through, and then to notify, and in the interim we've got the existing provisions which continue to be in force and which continue to need to be administered in terms of resource consents. So there is from a consenting administration point of view, the proposal is clear. If you don't agree with this recommendation, then potentially that is quite a delay in that, although noting we haven't actually said when this provision would be notified themselves. So just note that.
Thanks, Tony. Okay. How am I getting a vote here? Am I having a hands up? How's that going to work, Stacey, or are we going to go round to each councillor?
I guess it might be easiest for people to indicate if they are not supportive of the recommendation, and then assuming that if people do not speak or raise their hands and they are in support of the motion. Are you comfortable with that approach?
Yes, that's got possibilities.
I won't be supporting the motion.
Okay, thank you.
I won't be supporting the motion either.
Val, did I get
a negative? I won't support the motion either. I think it needs work.
Okay, Penny is supporting the motion. So where does that leave?
So
3-3.
Actually,
I think it leaves you on a chair.
You have a casting vote, Penny. You have a casting vote.
Okay, so I'm in support of the motion.
So that
Isn't
means
Ferg there? Oh, no, there's Callum.
he's not part of the committee.
The process.
just
Can
observes.
I just step in?
Thanks, Callum.
If we are in a situation where it's tied, potentially that does suggest that it potentially needs a bit more work. So potentially this could be, I don't know the exact process moving forward, but this may go back for further discussion and the workshop as has been suggested.
So you need to complete the voting process first. Sorry, just to go across the process. It's three.
So Penny.
3 all. Penny, you've got a casting vote you need to exercise.
Which I'm supporting the motion.
Okay, so then that is carried.
Okay.
So having said that, the second part of that recommendation does allow for subject to further work. So
Correct.
And Craig, we've taken the notes, the comments on board. We'll go back and you need to think about what that might mean. But at the moment, you've passed a resolution that supports the proposed change, which we'll continue to act on. Okay.
Thank you, Tony. Okay, we've got that, Stacey.
Yep, no, that's all good. So that, just to confirm, the recommendation has been carried. So that's what we're going ahead with. And we can now, we've got the recommendation to exclude the public. So
Yes.
that needs to be actioned, please. Noting that the recording will need to stop, and as well as the live streaming. So we'll just need to give that a bit of time to be actioned as well.
Happy to move to put into public excluded.
Thanks, Quentin. Can I have a seconder?
Yes,
I'll
John.
second that.
Okay, so Quentin moved, Stacey and John seconded. I will get a nod, will I, when we've gone out of recording?
Yep, if you want to, we can just adjourn the meeting for a minute just to wait for that to.
Okay, have a cup of tea, everybody, for a second.